He walked slowly through the narrow streets, the soles of his worn shoes scraping against the uneven stones. The wind was cold, and it made his thin jacket feel even thinner. He clutched a small, battered notebook under his arm, one that contained scribbles of notes and melodies he had learned on his own. Even though his clothes were old and his face was smudged with dirt, there was a spark in his eyes, a quiet hope that refused to fade. Every day he would pass the same buildings, the same faces, and the same noises. Some of the children would run past him, laughing at their own games, and some of the adults would glance his way with a mixture of curiosity and pity. He had long learned that people judged him quickly and spoke without knowing. But there was one thing that no one could take away from him: his love for music. It was his secret world, the place where he felt alive and free. On this particular morning, a poster caught his eye. It was pinned to a wooden board outside the small community hall at the end of the street. Bold letters announced a talent show to be held that evening. His heart skipped a beat. He had dreamed of playing for others even just once, but he had never imagined it could be possible. The words on the poster seemed to whisper to him, "This is your chance." He hesitated for a long moment, staring at the poster, wondering if he could gather enough courage. Doubts crept in. What if people laughed at him? What if he made mistakes? His stomach tightened, but the longing to share his music pushed him forward. By the time he reached home, his decision was made. He would try. At home, he pulled out his notebook and practiced the same piece he had been working on for months. Each note was a small victory, each chord a step closer to his dream. The music filled the small room, and for a while, the cold and the hunger outside seemed to disappear. His fingers danced across the keys, not with the skill of a trained pianist but with a passion that no teacher could ever give. He played until the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. The evening arrived, and the streets were alive with people heading to the community hall. He carried his notebook and a small bag containing nothing more than a few coins and a piece of bread for later. As he entered the hall, he saw rows of chairs, a small stage, and a piano that gleamed under the lights. The place was buzzing with excitement, filled with children and adults eager to see the performances. Some faces turned toward him, and he could feel their eyes judging him, silently questioning why he was even there. The first acts went by, and he watched from the back of the room. Children sang, some danced, and a few played instruments. The audience clapped politely, but he noticed a subtle hierarchy forming in the crowd. Those who appeared confident and well-dressed received cheers, while others were met with polite applause or mere nods. He felt a pang of fear but also a strange determination. He knew that once he sat at that piano, everything would be different. Finally, it was his turn. He stepped forward, feeling the weight of every gaze. Laughter and whispers greeted him from some corners. He could hear a few voices chuckling at the sight of his ragged clothes and dusty shoes. He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. The piano stood before him, a silent companion that seemed to understand him completely. He placed his fingers on the keys, and the room fell into an expectant silence. At first, his hands trembled, and he pressed the wrong keys, producing awkward sounds that made him flinch. He glanced up and saw the smirks and the raised eyebrows, and for a second he wanted to run away. But then he remembered the countless nights he had spent practicing alone, the hours spent imagining this very moment. He closed his eyes, took another deep breath, and let the music flow. The first few notes were soft, almost hesitant. But soon, a melody emerged, delicate and clear, carrying with it the emotions he had held inside for so long. His fingers moved with a grace he hadn't realized he possessed, each note telling a story of longing, struggle, and hope. The laughter and whispers began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of curiosity from the audience. People leaned forward in their seats, drawn by the unexpected beauty of the music. He played with all his heart, unaware of time passing. The notes seemed to wrap around the room, touching every listener, breaking through the walls of judgment and doubt. Some eyes widened in surprise, some lips parted in awe, and a few heads bowed, moved by the intensity of his performance. The boy was no longer just a poor child in tattered clothes. He was a musician, speaking directly to the hearts of those who had underestimated him. As he reached the final chord, a silence hung in the air, heavy with disbelief and admiration. Then, slowly, the room erupted into applause. The clapping was genuine, loud, and persistent. People who had laughed before now looked at him with respect and wonder. The boy stood there, a shy smile forming on his lips, feeling a warmth he had never known. For the first time, he realized that his music had the power to change how people saw him, and perhaps even how they saw themselves. He stepped down from the stage, still trembling but filled with a new sense of confidence. Strangers approached him, complimenting his talent, asking how long he had been playing. A few offered to help him learn more, to give him opportunities he had never dreamed of. But the boy only smiled and nodded, knowing that tonight was just the beginning. As he walked home under the starry sky, carrying nothing but his notebook and the memory of the music, he felt lighter than ever. The laughter that had greeted him at first no longer mattered. What mattered was the sound that had come from his heart, a sound that had touched others in ways words never could. And in that moment, he promised himself that he would never stop playing, never stop sharing the music that had always been a part of him, no matter what anyone thought. The next morning, he woke up before the sun, the sky just starting to lighten with pale streaks of orange and pink. The memory of the applause and the wide-eyed faces from the talent show filled his mind. He could still feel the vibration of the last note, the way the sound had lingered in the hall, touching every corner. Yet, with that joy came a nervous tension. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. People would remember his performance and some might expect more. Others, who had laughed before, might not be so kind now that they knew he had talent. He made his way to the small kitchen where the aroma of bread and tea was faint but comforting. His guardian, a kind but quiet woman who had always done her best for him despite having little herself, looked up from wiping the table. She smiled gently, her eyes reflecting pride but also concern. She knew the world could be harsh, and for a child like him, standing out in front of strangers could bring both admiration and ridicule. Still, she said nothing, letting him carry the memory of the performance like a precious flame. As he walked outside, the streets seemed different. People were no longer just faces in a crowd. They were observers, some watching him closely, perhaps expecting another surprise. He noticed a few children he had passed by every day glance his way with curious eyes, a mixture of respect and hesitation. For the first time, he felt that he belonged in a larger world beyond the small alleyways and worn-out rooftops he called home. Yet, the thought also made him nervous. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, and deep inside he feared letting people down. When he reached the small music shop at the corner of the street, he paused to admire the instruments displayed in the dusty windows. Pianos, violins, and guitars of every shape and size filled the space, each one holding the promise of new music. The shopkeeper, an older man with gray hair and a gentle smile, waved him in. He had noticed the boy at the talent show and had quietly admired his courage. The boy stepped inside, feeling both excitement and hesitation. The wooden floorboards creaked under his feet as he approached a small upright piano in the corner. His fingers itched to touch the keys, to recreate the magic he had felt the night before. He began to play softly, testing each note, letting the melody flow as naturally as breathing. The shop was quiet except for the music, and the older man watched silently, nodding with each chord. The boy's confidence grew with each passing moment, his fingers moving more freely, his heart soaring. The music carried a story of struggle and hope, of nights spent dreaming alone and mornings filled with small victories. When he finally stopped, he felt a mix of satisfaction and longing. It was never enough. The music always demanded more, and he knew he would never stop chasing it. Word about the boy's talent began to spread slowly through the neighborhood. A few adults who had attended the talent show spoke to friends and neighbors about the shy boy who could make the piano sing. Some were amazed, some skeptical, and some cautious, not wanting to assume anything without seeing more. The boy himself tried not to think about the attention. He wanted only to play, to let the music be his voice. But attention has a way of finding its way in. A small crowd started to gather outside the community hall, curious to see the boy who had surprised them all. He could hear whispers as he approached, some admiring, some doubtful, and some still ready to laugh. The fear returned briefly, that feeling of being judged before he could even speak. He shook his head and focused on the piano, reminding himself that the music was what mattered, not their opinions. Inside, the hall felt familiar and yet different. The piano sat waiting, and he approached it cautiously. The keys gleamed under the light, inviting him to create again. He started with a gentle melody, hesitant at first, feeling the weight of expectation pressing on his shoulders. The room was silent, every eye fixed on him. He could sense the tension, the anticipation, and it made his stomach twist. Then, slowly, he let go of fear and allowed the music to flow naturally, letting his emotions guide each note. The audience was a mix of old and young, some remembering the last performance, others seeing him for the first time. The first few chords were simple, almost timid, but the notes carried a depth that made people pause. As he continued, his fingers danced across the keys, drawing from the well of feelings he had kept hidden. The music grew stronger, more confident, weaving a story of longing and courage, of nights spent in quiet practice and days filled with hope despite scarcity. Some people shifted in their seats, surprised at the emotion pouring from the boy's fingers. Others leaned forward, drawn by the authenticity of the music. He noticed the skeptical faces soften, the doubtful eyes widen, and even the children who had been hesitant before began to watch with fascination. With each chord, he felt the audience's hearts opening, slowly, like a flower reaching for sunlight. The music was no longer just notes. It was connection, a bridge between his world and theirs. In the middle of his performance, something unexpected happened. One of the children in the front row, who had been whispering to a friend, suddenly stopped and stared. A small smile appeared on their face, genuine admiration shining in their eyes. He realized that what he was playing was not just impressive. It was touching people deeply, in ways words never could. The thought gave him courage, and his playing became more expressive, more alive, each note filled with emotion and intention. As he reached the final piece, the audience was completely captivated. No one moved, no one whispered. The room held its breath, as if waiting for the last sound to linger and release the tension. When the final chord rang out, there was silence for a heartbeat, and then the applause began. It was different from the night before, more powerful, more heartfelt. People were clapping not just for skill, but for the courage it took to play in front of them, for the honesty in every note. He stood there, breathless, feeling a warmth he had never known. The faces around him were not mocking, not questioning. They were full of respect and awe. Strangers approached him, praising his music, asking questions about how he had learned, offering encouragement and guidance. The boy smiled, feeling a deep sense of connection with people who had once seemed distant and indifferent. Walking home later, the sky now a deep blue with stars beginning to appear, he reflected on the day. The laughter that had greeted him the first time was now replaced by appreciation, and he realized that people's opinions could change, sometimes in a single moment. But more importantly, he understood that what mattered most was staying true to himself and his music. The joy of creating and sharing, of expressing what words could not, was far more powerful than fear or doubt. He reached his small room, set his bag down, and opened his notebook. The pages were filled with notes and melodies, some incomplete, some just ideas, but all precious. He began to write again, letting the events of the day inspire new sounds. The music seemed to flow easier now, with confidence and hope intertwined. He knew there would be more challenges, more people who might not understand him, but he also knew that he had discovered something invaluable. The music was his voice, and no laughter or doubt could ever take that away. The morning sunlight slipped through the cracks of the old wooden shutters, warming the small room with a soft glow. The boy stretched his arms, feeling the energy of the day ahead. Memories of the last performance still danced in his mind, filling him with a mixture of pride and nervous anticipation. Today he would play for the school assembly, a larger audience than before, and the thought made his heart race. He had never stood in front of so many people, and yet the excitement outweighed the fear. Music had become his shield and his voice, a way to express everything he had kept inside for so long. He dressed carefully, choosing the cleanest shirt he owned, even though it was worn at the edges. His shoes were patched in several places, but he polished them as best as he could. The ritual of preparing himself calmed him. Every small effort mattered. It was a way of telling himself that he was ready, that he deserved to be seen. He grabbed his notebook, stuffed with pages of melodies and notes, and headed out the door, feeling the familiar chill of the morning air on his face. The streets were busier than usual. Children ran past him, some stopping to wave, others giving curious glances. Adults chatted loudly, carrying baskets and briefcases, their eyes occasionally flicking toward him. He had grown used to the mixture of curiosity, pity, and admiration that followed him, but today it felt different. Today, people seemed to sense that something special was about to happen. He kept his gaze forward, focusing on the music waiting for him. Arriving at the school, he could hear the hum of voices and the shuffle of feet. The assembly hall was vast compared to the small community hall, filled with rows of chairs and polished floors that reflected the bright sunlight streaming through the windows. A grand piano sat on the stage, its polished black surface gleaming, and the boy felt a familiar surge of both awe and nervousness. The music called to him as it always did, but the audience seemed larger, more intimidating. He slipped in quietly, finding a place at the back until his turn. As he watched other performers, he noticed the same pattern he had seen before. Confidence and appearance seemed to win attention first, while talent had to fight to be noticed. Some children stumbled in their performances, while others dazzled the crowd with practiced routines. The boy observed quietly, letting the energy of the hall settle over him. Every performance reminded him that he was not alone in wanting to be seen. Yet he also realized that standing out required courage, something he had begun to discover within himself. Finally, his turn came. He walked onto the stage, the polished floor cool beneath his feet. The chatter of the audience faded as he approached the piano. He could feel the eyes of hundreds upon him, some curious, some skeptical. A few whispers drifted through the air, and he caught sight of a group of older children smirking at his simple clothes. The familiar twinge of fear rose in his chest, but he took a deep breath, reminding himself that the music was stronger than their laughter. This was his moment, a chance to let his soul speak. He seated himself on the piano bench, feeling the smooth keys beneath his fingers. The first notes were soft, almost tentative, but each one carried the weight of his determination. The room quieted, drawn in by the honesty of his playing. He could sense the audience leaning in, curious about the story behind the music. His fingers moved more confidently now, each note telling a tale of quiet struggle, hope, and unwavering passion. He poured everything he had into the performance, letting the melody grow and swell, rising and falling like waves in the ocean. The more he played, the more the audience responded. He noticed subtle shifts, eyes widening in surprise, heads tilting in admiration, and lips pressing together in awe. The music had a power that no words could convey, a force that bridged the distance between him and everyone watching. Even the children who had been whispering or smirking moments before were now captivated, their attention fully on the boy and the story he told through sound. The room was no longer filled with strangers. It was a shared space of emotion, where every heart beat in rhythm with the music. Midway through his performance, a teacher who had been supervising the assembly approached quietly, watching the boy with growing amazement. The teacher had seen many students perform over the years, but there was something extraordinary in the way this boy played, something that went beyond skill and practice. It was the emotion, the authenticity, the courage of someone who had nothing but music to carry him forward. The teacher's eyes shone with admiration, recognizing talent that deserved nurturing and attention. The boy reached the most challenging part of the piece, a series of rapid notes that required precision and control. His fingers flew across the keys, guided by instinct and the countless hours of practice that had prepared him for this moment. The audience sat in rapt silence, caught in the tension and beauty of the music. Some held their breath, others closed their eyes, feeling the melody wrap around them, pulling them into the boy's world. The music spoke of more than just sound. It spoke of courage, of dreams, and of a heart that refused to be silenced. As he neared the conclusion, he added a flourish, a note so unexpected and perfectly placed that it made everyone in the hall pause. There was a collective intake of breath, followed by a stunned silence that seemed to stretch for a heartbeat too long. Then, the applause began, hesitant at first, and then growing, swelling until it filled the room with thunderous clapping and cheers. The boy's chest swelled with emotion, tears threatening to spill, but he held them back, focusing on the music that had carried him to this moment. People from the audience rose from their seats, clapping and cheering with genuine admiration. Students, teachers, and even some of the parents who had come to watch were moved to their feet. Some wiped tears from their eyes, others exchanged glances filled with amazement. The boy stood there, breathless, realizing that for once, he had not been judged for his clothes, his quiet nature, or his background. He had been seen for his talent, his passion, and the courage to share it with the world. After the applause died down, the teacher who had watched so closely approached him. She spoke quietly, her voice filled with warmth and encouragement, praising his skill and offering guidance for future opportunities. The boy listened, absorbing every word, feeling a mixture of gratitude and excitement. For the first time, he realized that talent alone was not enough. It was courage, persistence, and the willingness to share one's heart that truly made a difference. Walking home later, the streets seemed brighter, the colors sharper, the air filled with possibility. He carried his notebook under his arm, fingers tracing the pages as he thought about the music he had played, the faces he had touched, and the newfound confidence that had begun to grow inside him. He knew that there would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt, and perhaps even laughter from those who still did not understand. But he also knew that the music inside him was stronger than any fear or judgment. That night, in his small room, he opened his notebook and began to compose again. The notes flowed effortlessly, inspired by the day's experience, the emotions of the audience, and the connection he had felt with everyone who had listened. Each page was a testament to his journey, a record of a boy who had refused to be invisible, who had transformed fear into courage and music into a bridge between hearts. The melodies he created were not just sounds. They were proof that even in a world quick to judge, talent and passion could shine through, surprising everyone who had doubted and inspiring those who believed. As he lay down to sleep, he thought of the day's applause, the faces of people who had been touched, and the teacher who had seen potential in him that no one else had noticed. The boy closed his eyes, feeling a quiet joy settle in his heart. Tomorrow would bring another day, another chance to play, to grow, and to show the world that music could speak louder than words, louder than doubt, and louder than fear. The next morning, the boy awoke to a sense of anticipation. News of his school performance had spread quickly, and whispers of his talent had reached even the local music teachers. People he had never met seemed curious about him, and the thought made his heart beat faster. There was excitement in the air, but also a quiet tension. He had learned that recognition could bring admiration as well as pressure. Still, he felt ready. The music had become more than a refuge. It was his voice, his way of showing the world who he truly was. He dressed carefully, choosing his cleanest shirt and making sure his shoes were polished. It was a small effort, but one that made him feel prepared. He grabbed his notebook and left his home, the streets of the neighborhood alive with the morning bustle. Children ran to school, neighbors chatted as they went about their daily chores, and vendors called out their wares. Some faces turned toward him, curious eyes following his movements. He held his head high, walking with a quiet confidence he had begun to carry since the talent show and the school assembly. Every step reminded him that his journey was only just beginning. When he reached the community hall, he found it buzzing with energy. A small crowd had gathered, more than before, filled with both familiar faces and strangers eager to see the boy who had surprised everyone with his music. The hall was brighter, the stage more polished, and the piano gleamed under the overhead lights. He could hear murmurs of anticipation and, in some corners, skeptical whispers, but he focused only on the instrument and the music that awaited him. His fingers itched to touch the keys, to let the melody flow once again. As he stepped onto the stage, a hush fell over the crowd. He could feel the weight of their gaze, the mixture of curiosity, doubt, and admiration pressing in from every side. The first few moments were tense. His fingers hovered over the keys, testing the air, letting the silence prepare him. Then slowly he began to play. The first notes were soft, tentative, carrying the careful balance of focus and emotion. The crowd listened, drawn into the story he was telling through the music. The melody grew, each chord more confident, more expressive than the last. The audience began to lean in, eyes wide, hearts opening to the emotions the boy poured into each note. People who had once doubted him now found themselves captivated. Children who had giggled or whispered now watched with awe, unable to look away. Adults, too, were caught in the spell of the music, some shifting in their seats, some closing their eyes to better absorb every sound. It was more than a performance. It was a bridge between the boy and everyone in the room, a connection forged through sound and feeling. Halfway through his piece, he reached a section that required rapid movements and precision. His fingers moved like lightning, yet there was a grace to every chord, a story behind each note. He felt a thrill of exhilaration, a surge of energy that made him lose track of the audience entirely. He was immersed in the music, the piano responding to every emotion, every thought, every dream he had ever held. The notes carried the struggles of his past, the hopes of the present, and the promise of the future, all blending into a performance that was as moving as it was skillful. The audience was silent, captivated by the boy's mastery and passion. Some leaned forward, hands clasped, breathing in sync with the rhythm of the music. Others sat back, overwhelmed by the beauty and intensity of what they were hearing. The whispers and laughter of the past seemed distant, almost impossible to imagine in the presence of this display of talent. For the first time, the boy realized that he could command attention not through appearances, but through the power of what he could create. As he approached the final notes, he felt a sense of release. The music had flowed through him, touching each listener, leaving a trace of emotion in every heart. He played the last chord with quiet strength, letting it linger, letting it resonate through the hall. There was a moment of silence, a breath caught in the collective chest of the audience, before the applause erupted. It was loud, overwhelming, sincere, and it filled the room with warmth and admiration. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, and calling out words of encouragement. The boy stood there, breathless and smiling, feeling a sense of accomplishment and joy he had never known. After the performance, people approached him. A few teachers offered guidance and support, suggesting lessons and opportunities to develop his talent further. Neighbors and strangers alike praised his courage and skill. One older musician, who had been quietly watching from the back, shook his head in amazement and spoke kindly to the boy, expressing a desire to mentor him. The boy listened, feeling a mixture of gratitude and excitement. For the first time, he realized that his life could change, that doors he had never imagined could now be open to him. Walking home later, the streets seemed brighter, filled with possibility. He carried his notebook close, running his fingers over the pages as he thought about the events of the day. The applause, the praise, the recognition. It was all new and thrilling. Yet he knew that the music itself was what mattered most. It had the power to transform fear into courage, doubt into confidence, and strangers into believers. He felt a deep connection to the people who had listened, knowing that in some small way, his music had touched their hearts. That night, he opened his notebook and began to compose once more. New melodies flowed from his imagination, inspired by the reactions he had seen, the emotions he had felt, and the connection he had made with the audience. Each note was a reflection of his journey, a testament to the resilience and passion that had carried him this far. He knew that challenges lay ahead, that there would be moments of doubt, but he also knew that the music inside him was a gift that could never be taken away. As he lay in bed, the piano notes echoing softly in his mind, he thought about the people who had once laughed at him and how their perceptions had changed. He realized that true recognition came not from wealth, appearance, or status, but from the courage to share one's talents and the honesty of the heart. With a quiet smile, he drifted into sleep, feeling a sense of hope and determination. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities, new challenges, and new audiences. But he was ready, for he had discovered the power of his music, and through it, the world could finally see him as he truly was. The morning sun broke through the thin curtains of the small room, painting warm streaks across the floorboards. The boy sat on the edge of his bed, notebook in hand, fingers tracing the familiar scribbles of music that had become part of his daily life. He felt a quiet excitement and a sense of anticipation. Today, he was going to play at a local concert organized by the community center, a larger stage with more people who had heard about his performances. His heart beat faster, a mixture of nerves and joy. He had grown used to performing in front of audiences, yet each new experience brought a fresh wave of exhilaration. He dressed carefully, choosing his best shirt and polishing his worn shoes, feeling a quiet pride in his appearance. He carried his notebook and a small bag with water and a piece of bread, essentials for the long day ahead. The streets were alive with activity, and as he walked, he noticed people glancing toward him. Some nodded in recognition, others whispered, and a few offered words of encouragement. It was a strange feeling to be noticed, to have the world take interest in him, yet he felt grounded, knowing that it was his music, not his clothes or appearance, that had earned this attention. Arriving at the community hall, he saw the stage set with chairs, microphones, and the grand piano shining under the lights. The room was filled with families, friends, and local residents, all eager to see the performers. He found a quiet corner backstage, taking a few moments to breathe and center himself. He ran his fingers over the notebook, imagining the melodies he had practiced countless times, feeling the notes flow through him even before touching the keys. When it was his turn, he stepped onto the stage. The crowd quieted, eyes fixed on him. He could feel the collective attention, the weight of their expectation pressing gently on him. A few people whispered, a few children pointed, and a few adults smiled encouragingly. He approached the piano, his hands resting lightly on the keys. The first note he played was soft, delicate, like a whisper to the audience. The music began to unfold, slowly at first, then growing richer, fuller, more confident. The boy's fingers moved with skill and emotion, each chord telling a story of struggle, hope, and dreams. The audience leaned in, captivated by the sound, drawn into the world he created with every note. The laughter and doubts from the past seemed far away, replaced by admiration and curiosity. He played with his heart, unaware of time, lost in the music and the connection it created. The hall seemed to fade around him, leaving only the piano, the notes, and the listeners who were caught in the spell of his performance. Halfway through, he reached a challenging section of the piece, a series of rapid notes and powerful chords. His fingers moved with precision and grace, guided by instinct and practice. The music was no longer just a series of notes. It was a conversation, a message carried from his soul to those who listened. Some in the audience closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others sat forward, absorbed in the intensity and beauty of the performance. Children who had been shy or distracted now watched with wide eyes, mesmerized by the boy's talent and passion. As he neared the end, he added a delicate flourish, a final touch that carried the emotions of the entire performance. The last note lingered in the air, a perfect echo that seemed to hold the room in a quiet, reverent pause. Then, applause erupted. It began as a gentle clapping, then grew louder, swelling into cheers and whistles. People rose from their seats, clapping, smiling, and calling out words of admiration. The boy stood for a moment, taking it all in, feeling the warmth of their appreciation. the joy of sharing something so deeply personal and being understood. After the performance, several people approached him. Some offered to teach him, some asked questions about his music, and some simply praised his courage and talent. An older musician, who had been observing quietly, offered to mentor him, to help him grow in ways he had never imagined. The boy listened, grateful and slightly overwhelmed, realizing that this moment could change his life. It was not just the music, but the recognition of his perseverance, his dedication, and his heart that made this day extraordinary. Walking home, the streets felt brighter, alive with possibility. He carried his notebook close, running his fingers over the pages, thinking about the new melodies he could create, the new performances, and the lessons he could learn. The applause and admiration were not the end goal. They were reminders that sharing his gift could inspire, move, and connect people. He thought of the laughter that had greeted him at the first performance, the doubts of those who had underestimated him, and smiled quietly. He had transformed fear and ridicule into courage and triumph, and through music, he had touched the hearts of others. At home, he opened his notebook and began to write again. The room was quiet except for the scratch of pencil on paper, as new ideas and melodies flowed from his mind. He thought about the future, about lessons, concerts, and opportunities that awaited him. But more than that, he thought about the music itself, the power it had to express feelings that words could not capture, to create understanding, and to inspire hope. Every note was a promise to himself, a reminder that his journey had only just begun. That night, lying in bed, he reflected on the path he had taken. From the small, lonely evenings of practice to the applause of large crowds, he had grown, not just as a musician but as a person. He understood that talent alone was not enough. It was courage, persistence, and the willingness to share one's heart that truly made a difference. The boy closed his eyes, feeling a deep sense of contentment and determination. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new audiences, and new melodies. But he was ready, armed with his music, his courage, and the knowledge that even a poor boy, with nothing but a piano and a dream, could amaze the world.